Arman Tsarukyan is the #1 ranked lightweight in the UFC.
Arman Tsarukyan is a real threat to anybody, okay? He is a tremendous fighter.
He's 23-3 on a huge win streak and is one of only 2 fighters to take down Islam Makhachev in the octagon. But when the UFC announced an interim lightweight title fight, Arman wasn't in it. The UFC froze him out completely. And it's worse than that, because he had to wait almost a year to get another fight. The question is, why? At UFC 311, Arman's moment had arrived. Finally, he had a shot at the title. 8 months of preparation, 3.5 weeks at high altitude in the Russian mountains, every detail accounted for. Then his back seized up.
After when I went to sleep, I started to feel my lower back, and I couldn't sleep all night. And I woke up, like maybe I slept like 30 minutes for a whole night. I don't know. And I was feeling like crazy pain on my lower back. And but that morning I didn't train, and we said we're gonna wait until evening, and let's see what like how my back gonna feel. And then we went to the press conference. After press conference was okay, and I started to cut my weight, and during the cut weight, just my lower back stuck, you know, when I was doing the bike.
He couldn't move, couldn't stand, couldn't make weight. The fight was off. Dana White responded in pretty brutal fashion.
You know, he had an opportunity, and you guys know how that played out, and he's gonna have to work his way back. I don't give a shit what the number says. He's gonna have to work his way back. There's just too much goes into this for those type of things to happen.
So there would be no immediate rebooking, no second chance, and no sympathy. Even though Arman was the #1 contender, the entire lightweight division started moving around him.
Everybody cares about #1 contender, and everybody knows I'm the most deserving fighter. I just got hurt. And you just because of that you want to put me on the back, you know. That's not fair.
And with guys like Dana and Joe Rogan saying he didn't deserve a title shot all of a sudden, it gave the fighters the excuse they needed. The #1 ranked fighter in one of the most stacked divisions in the sport became the most avoided man in the company. But to Arman, that was just something else to overcome. Born in Georgia, raised in Russia, representing Armenia, his path to the UFC was different from most fighters grinding their way up. For starters, his father ran a construction empire.
What did your dad do for a living?
He's in the construction business.
Okay, in Russia?
Yep.
Did you ever work with him?
Yeah, I used to work three months with him, and I said no way I can be here anymore.
Arman grew up with money, luxury cars, things most fighters only see after they've made it. But wealth didn't make him soft. He became a legit wrestler before he ever threw a punch for money. He played hockey for 10 years and pursued the NHL until corruption in the Russian junior system wiped out that dream, which turned him onto fighting.
To be from the rich family is good too. You don't rush, and you take your time, and you can you can I mean, you can do whatever you want, and you don't think about money, you know. Your head just focus on your fighting.
But no amount of focus can prepare you for getting knocked out in just your second fight. That loss to Alexander Bellick could have changed everything. Instead, he rattled off 12 straight wins. So by April 2019, the UFC came calling. And for his very first fight, they gave him Islam Makhachev on 4 weeks' notice in St. Petersburg. Arman lost the decision, but he took Makhachev down and earned fight of the night. The media called it one of Makhachev's toughest early tests, and from there, Arman kept winning. The only slip-up was June 2022 against Mateusz Gamrot. Arman lost the decision, but most of the media scored it for him. It was one of those fights where the judges saw it one way and everyone else saw it differently. Arman rebounded with wins over Damir Ismagulov and Joaquim Silva. Then he destroyed Beneil Dariush in 64 seconds, which put him right there at UFC 300, one fight away from the title shot. He had Charles Oliveira, the former lightweight champion, standing across from him. But what happened that night changed everything. On his way to the octagon, something happened with a fan in the crowd. Video shows Arman lunging towards someone, security stepping in, chaos for a few seconds. In the cage, Oliveira grabbed a guillotine early, but Arman cut Oliveira open and controlled him for most of the fight. It was a split decision, 29-28 on 2 cards, and Arman walked out the #1 contender.
And I know I'm gonna be a champion, and I can beat everybody in this division. So believe myself, believe on my hard work, and just do what I do.
But the focus wasn't on the fight.
It looked like he was punching somebody in the crowd during his walkout.
Yeah, you might not want to hang over the things and grab people when they're walking out. These guys are all fucking piped up and whatever, and I'm sure we're probably gonna get sued. We'll deal with that on Monday too.
No legal action came. The Nevada State Athletic Commission did, though. They withheld 20% of Arman's purse, $31,600, of his $158,000 show money. Then they hit him with a $25,000 fine on top of that, along with a 9-month suspension, which meant Arman couldn't fight until January 12, 2025. The company scheduled UFC 311 for January 18, 2025. Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 6 years after their first fight. The rematch everyone wanted. But after pulling out, Arman was back at the bottom of the mountain. No title shot, no timeline, and the entire lightweight division suddenly acting like he didn't exist. And then in December, Ilia Topuria, the lightweight champion, announced he needed time away. He was going through a crazy divorce, a custody battle, and was dealing with personal stuff that meant he wouldn't defend the belt for months.
Smokes! Ilia Topuria, the crazy son of a bitch, actually did it!
The top story is Ilia Topuria essentially is no longer the UFC featherweight champion. Ilia Topuria has essentially vacated the featherweight title.
So the UFC did what they always do when a champion goes inactive. They created an interim title fight. The #1 contender should have been the obvious choice. Arman Tsarukyan had been sitting at the top of the rankings for nearly 2 years, but the UFC booked #4 Justin Gaethje against #5 Paddy Pimblett for UFC 324. Arman wasn't even considered.
They saying that headbutt, pull out, punch, that I punch fan, but I didn't punch him. I just made him scared, you know. And yeah, because of that, so I can just say yes and just wait my chance.
Islam Makhachev came out publicly and said Arman deserved the title shot. Daniel Cormier criticized the decision. Ariel Helwani called it out. Arman basically blamed the UFC of showing favoritism toward Pimblett. And that's when the ducking really kicked up a gear. Paddy Pimblett said he'd fight Arman in a heartbeat. Arman saw right through it.
So you think if Paddy wins the interim belt, he'll try not to fight you?
Yeah, UFC gotta push him probably.
Really?
And the UFC gonna like try. So UFC loves him, right? How they gonna put me against Paddy? They gonna know.
Paddy's value to the UFC isn't his technical skill, it's his personality, his charisma, his ability to sell fights. Against Arman's methodical elite wrestling, that's the worst stylistic nightmare possible. The UFC knows this, so they want to protect the investment. You could even argue that Ilia Topuria started showing signs of avoidance. Arman's the obvious #1 contender, sitting there waiting. But Topuria publicly expressed interest in fighting Paddy instead.
I would put Justin Gaethje against Paddy Pimblett, me against Islam. Once I pass him, I get the title, and you put me against Paddy, because I think that he's gonna.
You think Paddy's gonna beat Justin Gaethje?
Easy.
Wow.
Or maybe moving up to welterweight. Anything but the guy actually next in line. And you can see why. Arman has 75% takedown defense, crazy wrestling-based pressure, and methodical control. That makes it really hard for strikers to maintain distance. Wrestlers can't establish dominance, and grapplers face someone who survived Charles Oliveira's submissions. There's no exploitable angle of attack. Which is why, when the UFC finally offered Arman a fight, it was a rematch with Mateusz Gamrot. Arman rejected it as disrespectful to his #1 ranking. But the truth is, the UFC was struggling to find anyone willing to face him at the appropriate level. Then, when he finally did get a fight, he reminded everyone exactly why they were scared. UFC Fight Night in Doha, Qatar was Arman's first UFC fight in 19 months, the longest layoff of his career. Across from him stood Dan Hooker, who's pretty much a gatekeeper for the top 10 at this point, but at least ranked higher than Gamrot. But the day before, during weigh-ins, Arman headbutted him during the face-off. UFC staff, including matchmaker Mick Maynard, had to step in and separate them. Thankfully, Hooker wasn't injured and the fight went ahead as planned, but the incident added another item to the UFC's list, another reason to call him unpredictable, another excuse. Arman locked in an arm triangle choke and Hooker tapped. It was dominant, clinical, with Arman showing no rust from the layoff. And he got another performance of the night bonus, which said everything. He was still the best without a belt. The UFC's response? Still no title shot.
I went there, just maul him and beat him so easy, choke him out, and then I was supposed to fight for the title.
Yeah.
And then they said, you're too dangerous to push you on the first card on the Paramount because headbutt, pull out, beat fan. That's why they said you gotta wait. And I said, okay, what I can do?
Yeah.
I'll just wait, and I know my belt is not gonna it's gonna be mine. I work every day because of that, so it is what it is. So.
The UFC was all in on this interim title fight between Pimblett and Gaethje. Arman had done everything right, beaten everyone they put in front of him, stayed active when they let him, dominated when they didn't. None of it mattered, but Arman wasn't just training during that 19-month layoff, he was learning a different game entirely, and he made a decision that changed everything. If the UFC wouldn't give him opportunities based on what he'd earned, he'd make himself too popular to ignore. He started appearing on Aiden Ross's live streams, even grappling with MMA Guru. He collaborated with Neon on chaotic, unfiltered content, and somehow he became a food phenomenon with mukbang-style eating videos where he'd demolish entire meals on camera. The viral moments piled up fast.
I don't know if they did this on purpose. In fact, I don't think they did it on purpose. But I think that the byproduct of them not doing the right thing, which was putting you in this title fight on January 24th, has actually made you more popular and more beloved.
He added over 1 million new followers in 2025 alone. Fans started saying Arman was literally the first person they saw whenever they opened social media. And what made it work was the authenticity. He wasn't performing or playing UFC fighter try streaming. He was genuinely unfamiliar with Western streaming culture, and that created natural comedy. Basically, his real personality came through, which meant fan reactions shifted hard. People said he changed their perception of him entirely, that he became their favorite fighter.
Why don't you cut off your mustache and then look like a Dagestani, so people might think you're like, you could wrestle like the Dagestani fighters?
No, I want to look like Armenian fighter.
Fans were openly advocating for his title shot based on entertainment value, and it was around this time that he figured out if he couldn't complete the main quest, he was just going to dominate side quests. At ADXC10 in Moscow, he submitted Patrick E. Pitbull Frere with a rear naked choke. September 19th, 2025, ACBJJ 18, he defeated Benson Henderson, a former UFC champion, via arm triangle technical decision. December 17, 2025, he had an all-star title fight against Mehdi Baydalaev. Arman locked in a rear naked choke in the final minute and claimed the championship. Then on January 10th, 2026, he made his freestyle wrestling debut. RAF 05 in Florida facing Lance Palmer, a former PFL champion with a 23-8 MMA record. Arman dominated him with a 10-0 technical fall in the first period. It wasn't even close. The guy has basically shown in every way possible that he's done waiting for the UFC to decide his fate. At this point, he's done everything the UFC could possibly ask. Built an elite resume, stayed active across multiple combat sports, rebuilt his public image through social media. He's even admitted his mistakes.
Headbutt was so bad. I shouldn't do that because Hooker, he's a man. If it was some different guy who said, "Oh, I get hurt. I don't want to fight," so can you imagine if Manny went like what happened? You know,
cancel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so bad. So hopefully it happened and nothing happened. But I couldn't control myself, you know, that moment.
The fan base is behind him now. Their resume is undeniable. The UFC can freeze him out for a while, sure, but the #1 ranking doesn't just disappear. And fighters can't duck him forever. Arman has 5 consecutive wins in the UFC, 11 if you give him the Gamrot decision. And now he's learned to play the game the UFC actually values, making him more marketable than ever. And that could change everything.